All right, good morning. Ooh, I forgot to tear down the green screen. Well, that'll take a half a second, but I can keep talking to you. This was an unrelated matter from yesterday. Oh. There. Now it looks like the brush fire mind. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Hopefully you'll join us soon. I don't see anybody in the chat just yet, so I'll dance around it for just a few minutes. Till we got a few more eyeballs on here. And I'm not entirely sure what happened to Cameron. I see, looks like there's 3 watching on. There you are, Steve. You're not chopped liver. You just hadn't made a comment yet when I was talking. So good morning. So I've got Steve with us. It looks like I've got a handful watching on YouTube now, and I sent Cameron a text message. We'll see if he joins us or not. Thankfully, with the redesigned setup, it works. So, hopefully, Krista's watching. I'm going to talk tech for just a second, and then I'm going to get into the article. Correct, Steve. That's right. That's right. I don't see the post before I cut the intro. That's correct. So, I have these wonderful little devices that I picked up. I picked up 2 sets of them recently. It's the Voikel Air set, right? Frankly, they're a cheaper knockoff kind of the Rode Link, I think it's called. But Rode has a set like this where it's a nice small bricky receiver and a nice small bricky transmitter, and the transmitter, this for a lavalier mic, the transmitter actually has a mic built into it, so I can run a lav off of it and clip a lav up here. It's nice and out of the way, and it's not super visible, but it'll work just like that. Right? You know, with the microphone on, not real distracting in the shot. And I've used these on a couple of shoots now, and they're fantastic. But this one in particular, so I've got another one over here. I've got 2 sets of them. So a major advantage over the Rode version of the same thing is it's 2 transmitters and 1 receiver instead of 1 receiver per transmitter. That's a big deal. And they work great. But one of my transmitters shit the bed, and I think what happened, and this is why I hope Krista's watching, is when I went and did a little shoot for her at the church a couple weeks ago, I handed one of them to the sound engineer to plug in so that I could get a wireless feed off of his board. And he went and plugged it into the back of the end of the speaker chain. And I suspect that's when it got blown. Poor kid seemed to... He needs some practice. The mix all night was horrible. And it's okay. You know, young kid volunteering to run the sound setup for a school play put on at a church. That is the place to make the mistakes. But it cost me a little money. Not a big deal, but it did happen. So, I haven't heard back from Cameron yet, and I don't see anybody else popping up in the chat, so I'm just going to keep talking to Steve. Let's go through this article. I would have liked to have seen Alex McDonald join us by now. By now. He's usually not with us this early. But Alex was asking me about where I thought there were crimes mentioned in this article. So I'm going back through the same article we were talking about yesterday, And I'm actually using both of my double scroll wheels to get there. Back to where we were. It was where it said, okay, second odd thing happened. There was a conspiracy unfolding. We got down to this marker down here where it says the 10% mark, but that's close enough. This is what I want to go back to. So, there are a few places where I am saying that they have actually committed crimes. Not everything that's highlighted here has to do with the crimes. Everything that's highlighted, as you see, I've got a PDF copy of the article pulled up so I can highlight. The highlight points are just places that I wanted to elaborate a little more. But they got states to change voting systems and laws. Here is the first place that crimes were committed. Now, if you can convince the state to change laws legally, then there's a good argument to be made that that's shady. And I don't think there's a very good argument to be made that that's not unethical and shady in this context. To change voting systems and laws. However, bear in mind, there are laws, there are constitutional restrictions, and there are specific laws which dictate the way that laws and voting systems can be changed. So I don't know that the changes to voting systems were made illegally. However, on the question of laws, in Georgia, we had Raffensperger sign a deal with a bunch of Democrat operatives, and it was a settlement. And in the settlement, he gutted the signature verification requirements and identification requirements on voting. He literally, right, this is not an interpretation. It was literally a deal. It is in black and white, and you can read it. Signed a deal with Democrat operatives, including Stacey Abrams, I believe, or at least with her consultation, which explicitly, and there's no other way to interpret it. There is no other reasonable and intelligent way to interpret it. Explicitly removed security apparatus from the Georgia voting system. It made it more difficult to verify the identities of voters. Or said more correctly, it made it easier to commit fraud. Now, the question of whether or not sufficient fraud was committed and proved to change the outcome of the election, that's one thing. To say that no fraud occurred in this election is a factually false statement. And in fact, to say that Donald Trump lied about election fraud is a lie. That is a false statement. Because consider this. At the times, Donald Trump did finally concede the election after everything went down, right? And he stepped down and walked away peacefully once the dust settled. He did make claims that there was election fraud that occurred. But every journalist, every politician, every person who says that Donald Trump lied about there being election fraud is either wrong or lying. Now, there is a slim possibility that he lied about it. But the possibility that the people making the claim that he lied is even slimmer than that. And here's how to understand this. At the time, Donald Trump made claims that there was election fraud. Have I been taken down yet? Are y'all still with me? At the times that Donald Trump made the claims that there was election fraud, the facts of the matter were these. There were thousands of signed affidavits of people claiming that they had witnessed election fraud. There were piles of evidence that illegitimate, illegal votes had been cast. That there was fraud in the course of this election is an undeniable, uncontrovertible fact. The question of whether or not that fraud was sufficient to change the outcome of the election, that's a different matter. But that there was fraud is an undeniable fact. That there was the possibility that that fraud was sufficient to change the outcome of the election was in fact a possibility. And at the time that Donald Trump said he believed that there was fraud, there were court cases outstanding which alleged as much and offered to present evidence. And so for you to say that Donald Trump lied when he claimed there had been fraud is for you to make the argument that at that time you know that he knew that there were no merits to the cases before the courts alleging fraud and presenting evidence to support those claims. You cannot even credibly make that claim today because the vast majority of those cases were dismissed without hearing the merits. They were dismissed on ridiculous excuses like latches or standing, or the absurd argument that this case by itself can't be heard because it wouldn't affect the outcome. And I've explained on this show before that that was a dirty little trick that they played, where it's just like the way money launderers commit their crime, the way these election fraudsters committed their crime. It's just like the way money launderers commit their crimes. The special precaution that money launderers take is at $10,000 when transactions move, you take $10,000 out of a checking account, you put $10,000 into a savings account, you try to wire $10,000 to somebody. They ask you extra questions when you do that. So money launderers move in blocks of $9,500. Not $9,999. You know, you don't want to kiss it. You want to back off a good little bit, right? So they back off about $500. They tend to work in blocks of $9,500. Well, if you tend to work in election scams of less than what would affect the national total, then you can compartmentalize. Oh, that sounds interesting and familiar, because we've seen so much corruption in the U.S. intelligence apparatus. I wonder if somebody's been talking to political operatives about secured, compartmentalized information. Not that that's a thing. So, we know that what Raffensperger did was crime. Because what Raffensperger did was he changed the way the law works without the legislature. Normally, that's not okay. Specifically, when you're talking about affecting an election, that's very not okay. And when I say that's very not okay, I'm not talking about the difference between whether a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable and whether or not it's a suspension bridge. I'm talking about the difference between whether or not it's explicitly forbidden by a constitution, the state or federal. Same thing happened. Well, a different thing happened that is similarly illegal in Pennsylvania and in other places. In Pennsylvania, they changed the rules on when deadlines would be. Steve mentions this in the comments. They changed laws without the legislature and passed what would have been the deadline for changes. One of the big changes that was made in Pennsylvania is they extended the deadline. They said, look, we don't care if you get your mail-in ballot in the mail on time, or if you even have a postmark on it, whatever. If you just mail it, 2 or 3 days after the election, then we'll take it. Whatever, it's fine. That's a crime. Okay? Changing law illegally is a crime, and there is a legal process for changing law. This is the first crime that is clearly admitted to in this article that I'm certain is a crime which has been committed. Now, back up a little bit there, because I've just made two claims here, and let me clarify what those two claims are. In this article, it says they got states to change voting systems and laws. Excuse me. I am alleging that if these people somehow influenced states to change laws without the involvement of the legislature, especially where it concerns elections, then these people in this shadowy cabal, as they're called by the article, are complicit in the conspiracy to commit crimes. Quite separately, the claim that I'm making about Raffensperger and Shapiro, that would be Josh Shapiro, not Ben Shapiro. Important clarification. Although less and less of late, right? Anyway, so Raffensperger and Shapiro, what I'm saying about them is not that I'm alleging that I have a suspicion that they may have been involved in crimes. No. To be very clear, what I'm saying about them is that they committed crimes is an immutable fact. That Raffensperger and Shapiro, quite separately, in their official capacity and abusing of the authority granted them by the peoples of their various states and jurisdictions, entered into contract illegally, abused the authority of their offices, and in so doing committed the crime of waste, fraud, and abuse of office, while simultaneously committing the quite separate additional crime of making an illegal change to the law. They should not just be removed from office. They should both be prosecuted and subsequently, once most likely have been found guilty based on the evidence, assuming they don't get a shady enough lawyer to lie his way through it, convicted and incarcerated. Tom's with us. Morning, Waller. What's up, baby? Ben Shapiro's sister is a milk truck. I don't know if Bill... Waller, I'm not sure that works. I don't think pig's milk is kosher. God, I gotta stop. Recruited armies of poll workers. Now here's another one. It says they recruited armies of poll workers and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. There is a good argument that the mail-in votes were not legal to begin with. For several reasons. And that's worth going into in more detail at another time, quite separately from this. But this fragment here troubles me a lot. Recruited armies of poll workers. If a poll worker had an effect on the election, if a poll worker or any number of poll workers had effects on the election, those people are criminals. A poll worker is explicitly forbidden from having a partisan involvement at all. A poll worker cannot tell you who to vote for. They cannot tell you how to vote. Well, they can instruct you mechanically in the physical process of casting a ballot. But a poll worker cannot influence your vote legally. They cannot even wear clothing with partisan messaging on it. Now, I was a poll watcher. I voted in Georgia. I voted in the primary, I voted in the general, and I voted in the special election. So that's 3 times I was in the polls in Georgia and Rockdale County. I was a poll watcher, and I was a recount observer. So I've spent some time around these people, and I can tell you that they are a partisan group, and it surprised me. Not entirely, not all of them, but quite a few of them, and it surprised me very much that after all of the warning shots that I got and the disclaimers that I had to sign going into work as a poll watcher and a vote count observer, about not being able to wear certain things, or you can't wear campaign material, so on and so forth. I just made it a point to wear a bright red shirt every time. I saw poll workers wearing explicitly partisan left-wing material. Like, I was told I couldn't wear anything that had to do with any kind of politics. When I went to observe the vote recount, the Carter Foundation had people there, and they were wearing Carter Foundation t-shirts. That I don't understand how that's not a partisan statement. They're wearing blue shirts that say Carter Foundation. I'm like, So it's rules for thee and not for me. So they recruited armies of poll workers. I'm going to go ahead and point out right here that this is another place that they're admitting to crimes. The recruiting of armies of poll workers in and of itself is not a crime, but from what they're detailing through here, how they worked so very hard to cheat on an election, what other reason did they have to recruit armies of poll workers, as they claim here, than for those poll workers to try and get involved? Now, we've seen from the Project Veritas videos, we've seen several of them where they have people who are working as voter assistants. They're not actually poll workers. He may have done a few with poll workers as well, but people who go to the polls and they serve to help people who are disabled, right? So they'll go up with somebody who does or don't speak the language, right? So they'll go up to the actual voting booth with the person to translate for them, and they'll absolutely, we've got confessions on camera. They will absolutely take 100 people a day and walk them up to the booth and say, this is the one you want. Vote for this one. Click here. Do this. Right? And even if they don't say, well, it might not even be, well, vote for Joe Biden. It's, well, Joe Biden likes you and Donald Trump hates you. Oh, well then I won't vote for the guy that hates me. Derp, derp. So that I'm going to go ahead and say that the recruited armies of poll workers, this is not an explicit admission of guilt. This is not an explicit admission of a specific crime, but not to infer that this was done not just with a criminal outcome, but with criminal intent is, I would say, that would be extremely naive. And then we have this: they successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation. That is a false statement. That is a false statement. And moreover, this writer knows that that is a false statement. If it was to take a harder line against disinformation, then that would cut both ways. But quite the contrary, if you remember, after the Hunter Biden laptop story from the New York Post was actively and virulently repressed, we started talking about, now, hey, wait a minute, but why? Oh, well, we think it was hacked and it's personal data that was acquired without the permission. Wait, didn't you just publish all the Trump tax returns you could get your hands on? Well, yeah, but that was different because why? Because it's not the private information of someone that was acquired without their permission and then published on your platform? No, the only difference is it hurts Donald Trump and it doesn't hurt Joe Biden. So this statement, harder line against disinformation, is false. What they pressured social media companies to do and what social media companies did is they operated straight up 100% Soviet KGB style disinformation and propaganda campaigns. They suppressed select information and they chose to actively promote select misinformation. The Trump tax returns are a good example. So in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop, there was no misinformation. There was no misinformation relating to the Hunter Biden laptop. There wasn't any information disseminated related to that story to begin with. The original story was Hunter Biden had a laptop. He left it with a computer repair guy. He left it there for so long that it became abandoned property. The computer repair guy delivered that laptop to the FBI. Now, this should boil your blood because we only heard this story in the middle of the year in 2020. But the fact of the matter is, the FBI had that laptop and was aware of its contents, which explicitly detailed the workings between Burisma, Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden's involvement. The FBI had that laptop with that information back in the third quarter of 2019, which is to say that the FBI was possessed of exculpatory information relative to the first impeachment of Donald Trump prior to the conduct of that impeachment and chose to repress and withhold that information from those proceedings. Had that laptop not been actively repressed and suppressed by a branch of the federal government subordinate at the time to the president who was being impeached on no standing, no grounds, and no evidence, had the branch of the government subordinate to the president not chosen to traitorously repress active exculpatory data that would have protected him from these false and ridiculous allegations, then that impeachment would never have occurred. To say nothing of what the impeachment did to his reelection, or what the active propagandistic KGB-style repression of that information did to his election. But when his tax returns were illegally obtained and then illicitly released, there were articles which made the claim in the headline and then debunked themselves within the same article, made the claim that he only ever paid like $700 or something, that he paid some ridiculously small amount in taxes, or he paid nothing in taxes. And of course, we didn't even have to wait till later for the full story to come out and debunk the article. The article itself says, well, he actually paid several $1 million in taxes, but this one particular type of income tax, he only paid $700. Yeah, because it's all he owed. Right? That was misinformation. The headline said Trump paid no taxes or Trump paid very little taxes. Then the rest of the article goes to detail, well, he paid very little taxes on this. It's like, oh, I went and bought a new truck and a CD to put in the radio, and then you reported what I paid in sales tax on the CD as if it was all the taxes I paid on the total purchase. And so something's wrong with me because I only paid taxes on the CD? For one, if you're paying any more taxes than you absolutely positively have to, you're a sucker. And if you're paying any taxes at all, it's under duress. So, the article goes on to talk about preventing Trump's conspiracy theories. Name them. In this context, they're using the phrase conspiracy theories to suggest that, and they go on to say, and false claims. They're using the phrase conspiracy theories here to suggest that he expressed expectations, theories, or ideas that are not true. Which ones? Was it not true that the mail-in voting system was implemented explicitly as an end run around the expectation that Trump voters would turn out in huge numbers to vote for Donald Trump? Because you might remember clearly that we were told all year that we were going to have to do mail-in voting because of the pandemic. And as I mentioned yesterday, we saw information in here earlier that they were talking about taking precautions to deal with the pandemic over a year before the election. That would be over a year. Well, that would be several months, 3 to 6 months, somewhere in that time frame, before we were dealing with the pandemic, before we were aware of the pandemic. Which means either the people in this conspiracy, and we can call it that because they've called it that, and they've set it out that is exactly what they've done here. Either they had forewarning of the pandemic, and rather than take precautions to protect the world from massive losses from the pandemic, they chose to use that information to affect the outcome of an election, instead of to protect the world from a dangerous pandemic. Or, and this actually may be the more likely case, completely without the foreknowledge of a pandemic, they had decided back before January of last year, more than a year ago, so we're actually talking like September, October of 2019, these people had decided that they were going to use mail-in voting completely separate from any foreknowledge, which they may or may not have had at the time. So let's assume for just a second for this example that they didn't. They didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, and so they were putting together this plan to use the mail-in voting apparatus as an end run around Trump's otherwise insurmountably positive chances of victory. Right? Because without having to make any claims about whether the election was stolen or not, there are some facts that are inignorable. We almost never fail to re-elect an incumbent. It's very rare that an incumbent is defeated in office, is defeated on his re-election bid. The same is true of a president who has a good economy going for him. And remember, when we're talking about the mail-in scam, we're not talking about the economy of 2020, because according to this article, they were making these decisions over a year before the election. Which means we're talking third quarter 2019 when the economy was exploding. Absolutely booming. No new foreign entanglements. And so on and so forth. At a bare minimum, at the time that this conspiracy, this shadowy cabal that's being described by this article, at the time that they put themselves together, there was not a reasonable expectation. No reasonable person, based on historic precedents and Donald Trump's record as president, could have harbored the expectation that he had anything but a near guaranteed re-election victory due in 2020. Now, some of those metrics changed. Some of those metrics changed in 2020 with the pandemic. You've got reports of bunches of people dying. I'm saying it that way very carefully because we suddenly didn't have any flu deaths. You've got reports of lots and lots of people dying. You've got a sudden and dramatic hit to the economy, right? Guys, the coronavirus, the damaging effects that the coronavirus had on the U.S. economy were so bad that it took the Donald Trump economy and made it nearly as bad as the Barack Obama economy. That's a fantastic joke that happens to be a factually true statement. Fact check me. Honestly, this is a 6,500 word document. I highly recommend you all go read it. I will probably come back to it and treat it more, but I just spent a half hour on this one paragraph. And that's going to have to be me for today. Y'all be safe out there. Thanks for watching. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.